Welcome to Ground Control. I wanted to provide you guys with a tips video to cover some items that were not in the build video series, and also getting your control surface deflection set up in your CG so you'll have a successful maiden flight with this little nano plane. Alright, one of the first things that I did with the airframe, because they changed the orientation of the aileron servo from being on top of the wing to being on the bottom of the wing, and the aileron servo control arm, control rods, and control horns on the ailerons are right at the bottom of the plane. So where I have to land, I would certainly tear that up. So I took a little piece of Adams foam board, just a little semicircle piece, and I glued it to the bottom of the fuselage so that it would give me room for my battery underneath the wing, and so that when I land it will keep those components up off the ground so that they don't get damaged. And as a side benefit, it also gives me a place to hold on to the plane to launch it without getting my fingers in the way of the aileron control arms and control rods and servos. So that has worked out really well. One of the things that you need to do on any of these little brushed motors, because there's no way to balance the props on a stand. So what I do is I get everything connected up with my receiver. I throttle the motor up to full while I'm holding the motor in my hand. Make sure you keep away from the prop, and see how much vibration is in it. And I have yet to find one that doesn't need to be balanced. So what I did was I just took a little tiny piece of painter's tape and I put it on one blade, throttle it back up again, and see if that smooths it out or if it makes it worse. If it makes it worse, then take that piece of tape and put it on the opposite blade, throttle it up again, move the tape up and down the blade until you get it right where it makes everything run really smooth. Okay, so I highly suggest that you balance that prop before you install the motor and prop in the plane. The motor mount on the plane, it says in the instructions to epoxy the motor into the motor mount. Well, I didn't want to do that. That would make it kind of difficult to get the motor out of it again when you need to replace the motor. And also I like to experiment with power systems, so I'm going to be trying a couple of different brushed motor and prop combinations in this plane to try and get more power. So what I did was I just seated the motor and the prop in the foam, and I took a couple of small strips of packing tape, and I used packing tape to go across the motor and the bottom part of the fuselage, top part of the fuselage, above and below where the cutout is for the motor. And I did that on both sides, and that holds it in there just fine. You're not going to have to worry about that not being strong enough. That's plenty strong. These little brush motors do get hot, so you want to check your tape after every few flights, and when it's time to replace the tape, just replace those two strips of tape. If you ever need to replace the motor or you want to switch it out, it's easy to just peel that tape off of there, disconnect the motor, put a new one in, and just tape it in again. And that keeps everything really lightweight and clean. Let me see. The battery that I tested with, because I didn't have a 150 milliamp one cell battery that had the type of connector that I had for my micro receiver, but I had some 260 milliamp 30C one cell lipos. This little guy right here, they had the right connector that I needed for my receiver, so I went ahead and flew with those. Now this 260 milliamp 30C lipo is 2 grams heavier than the 150 milliamp lipo that I had. So I think what I'm going to do is change the connector on the lipo, on the 150 milliamp lipo, put it on here and see how it flies with that. My guess is you would probably be able to do a decent loop without that additional 2 grams of weight. But I like the flight time that I get with this. Now I flew for, let me see, 3 minutes and 6 seconds. I had my timer set for 3 minutes because I wasn't sure how much flight time I was going to get out of it. And when I landed, I still had 3.7 volts in this battery. So with the 260 milliamp 30C lipo, one cell lipo, should be able to get 4 minutes of flight time out of this. With 150 milliamp, you're probably going to get around 3, or maybe a little bit less. So I like this size battery for this plane. but I do need to maybe put a 10mm motor and 3-inch prop on here to provide a little more thrust, and I'll be testing that out. Okay, so the CG in the instructions, it says 15mm back from the leading edge of the main wing, but it doesn't say where it measures that, you know, because the wing's tapered. So are they measuring it, you know, up by the fuselage, mid-wing, down at the tip? But where I found the CG, the way I like to fly, with a neutral balance on it, if you look at where the little plywood support is for the wing, if you go out to the last 10mm, you know, just a finger's width of being at the end of that plywood support, my CG is 23mm back of the leading edge, not 15. I tried putting it at 15 and it was just too nose heavy. So I moved it back to 23mm, which the tip of your finger is just right up against that piece of wood, and that's where I like my plane, this plane balance, to fly the way I like to fly it. So I would say put your CG, you know, somewhere between 20 to 23mm back from the leading edge of the wing, right there, a finger's width out at the end of that plywood wing support, and that'll get you a successful maiden. As far as the deflection on all the control surfaces, I measured mine before I made this video. I have 5mm of deflection in each direction on all the control surfaces, and I like the way it flies and the way it handles that way. It gives me a good roll rate with the ailerons. It gives me plenty of pitch control with the elevator and plenty of rudder control. So in each direction, on the rudder, the elevator, and the ailerons, you want 5mm up, 5mm down, for a total of 10mm of movement on that. Okay, so the other thing that's kind of important is where you connect your control rods. And I try to connect my control rods so I have the best mechanical advantage from the servo and the greatest amount of resolution in the control surface, while still being able to get the amount of deflection that I want. So on the rudder, I have the control rod connected to the bottom hole on the servo control arm and on the outer hole of the rudder control arm. On the elevator, I have the control arm connected to the outermost hole on the servo control arm and on the top hole of the control horn for the elevator. So, and that worked out really well. And then on the ailerons, I have the control rods connected to the center hole on the control arm on both sides for the servo, and on the bottom hole or the outermost hole for the control arms on the ailerons, and that gave me the deflection and the resolution that I wanted on the plane. And if you watch the Maiden Flight, it flew pretty darn good. I'm really happy with it. It's a fun plane to fly. I want to get it to where it has a little more power because I want to put a micro FPV system on it. So stay tuned for that. On the hole that you had here on the bottom of the fuselage underneath the main wing, where you bring the power lead for the receiver out on the other side for the battery, I had to expand the size of that hole in order to get this little square connector through it. So, and I have my receiver right on the bottom underneath the leading edge of the wing on the left side of the fuselage. And then I made another hole in front of it and just took a rubber band, stuck one end of the rubber band through the hole that was already in the fuselage, stuck the other end through the other hole, and then just used a little small section of twist tie to tie those two pieces of rubber band together, and then use that rubber band to hold all those wires down to make everything nice and neat on the receiver. All your servo leads and your power lead for your motor. You can use whatever type of connector you want from your receiver depending on what kind of batteries you have for your power. And for the motor, I don't like soldering the motor wires directly onto the receiver copper pads, because experience has told me that after you solder those 2 or 3 times, those copper pads can actually delaminate from the board. So what I did was I took single pin servo connectors with single pin shrouds, and I used those for the lead from the receiver to the motor and from the motor to the receiver. And they're lightweight. They're nice because I can use a crimper to put them on any brushed motor, and that way I'm not soldering directly onto the pads for the receiver. So I think that works out really well. All right, so those are your tips and the things that I did in the build video that you didn't see, because the build video was just for getting the airframe put together. So there's your deflections, your tips for your CG. If you do all that, set your plane up that way, you'll have a successful Maiden, and then you can tweak it however you want after that. But you saw how it flew in the Maiden Flight, and it flew really well. So I didn't have any problems. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Please give a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll have more videos of this little guy, and I'll be testing more motors and props on it until I get it tweaked just the way I like it. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the air.